The Compass of Secrets, Chapter 1, The Letter That Changed Everything. It was a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Cedar Ridge, Vermont, the kind of morning where the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the world seemed to slow down just enough to let you catch your breath. Eleanor Harper, a 58-year-old widow, sat at her kitchen table, sipping her usual black coffee. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It had been 3 years since her husband, Thomas, passed away, and though the grief had softened, it still lingered like a shadow in the corners of her life. Eleanor's routine was predictable, almost comforting in its simplicity. She would wake up at 6:30, brew her coffee, and sit by the window, watching the world wake up. But today, something was different. As she reached for the morning paper, her hand brushed against an envelope tucked beneath it. It wasn't the usual pile of bills or advertisements. The envelope was aged, its edges slightly yellowed, and the handwriting on the front was unmistakably Thomas's. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she thought she might faint. She recognized that handwriting anywhere, the neat, precise cursive she had grown to love over the years. But how could this be? Thomas had been gone for 3 years. Who could have sent this? And why now? With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As she unfolded it, she noticed the date at the top, October 15th, 2018. That was a week before Thomas's death. Her heart raced as she began to read. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm so sorry I couldn't say goodbye in person, but I hope this letter finds you well. There's something I need to tell you, something I never got the chance to share while I was alive. It's about the cabin in the woods, the one I always talked about fixing up. There's a secret there, Eleanor, one that might change everything. Please go to the cabin. You'll find instructions in the old toolbox in the shed. I love you, always. Thomas. Eleanor stared at the letter, her mind reeling. The cabin in the woods? What on earth was Thomas talking about? They had bought the old cabin years ago, but it had fallen into disrepair, and neither of them had bothered to fix it up. It had become more of a burden than anything else, and what secret could possibly be hidden there? She set the letter down and took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking, but a strange sense of determination had begun to settle over her. If this was Thomas's final wish, she owed it to him to follow through. She had to go to the cabin. Chapter 2. The Cabin in the Woods. The drive to the cabin was a little over an hour from Cedar Ridge. Eleanor hadn't been there in years, and the road leading to it was overgrown with weeds and tree branches that scraped against the sides of her car. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with questions. What could Thomas have meant by a secret? Was this some kind of final posthumous gesture to make her smile, or was there something more to it? When she finally arrived, the cabin looked just as she remembered it, a modest, weathered structure surrounded by towering pines. The front porch sagged slightly and the wooden siding was chipped and peeling. It was a far cry from the cozy retreat Thomas had always dreamed of turning it into. Eleanor parked her car and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The air was cool and filled with the earthy scent of pine needles. She made her way to the shed at the back of the property. The door was jammed, so she had to tug hard to get it open. Inside, the space was cluttered with old tools, gardening equipment, and boxes of who knows what. But there, on a dusty workbench, was the toolbox Thomas had mentioned. It was an old metal one, its red paint faded and chipped. Eleanor lifted it carefully, setting it down on the ground. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, among the wrenches and screwdrivers, was a small, sealed envelope with her name written on it. She tore it open and found another note from Thomas. Dear Eleanor, by now I'm sure you're wondering what this is all about. I'm sorry for the mystery, but I needed to make sure you were ready for what comes next. You'll find a key taped to the underside of this toolbox. Use it to unlock the floorboard in the corner of the cabin's living room. Be careful, and whatever you do, trust your instincts. Love, Thomas. Eleanor stared at the toolbox, her heart pounding. Sure enough, there was a small brass key taped to the bottom. She pried it off and clutched it tightly in her hand. What could possibly be hidden beneath the cabin's floorboards? Money? Old photos? Something else entirely? She hurried back to the cabin, stepping inside for the first time in years. The air was musty, and a thin layer of dust covered everything. The living room was just as she remembered it. The worn-out couch, the stone fireplace, the old rug that Thomas had always said we should replace. She moved the rug aside and knelt on the floor, running her fingers along the wooden planks until she found one that seemed slightly loose. Using the key, she pried it open. Beneath it was a small hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a small, intricately carved wooden box. Eleanor's hands shook as she lifted them out. She opened the journal first, flipping through the pages. It was filled with Thomas's handwriting, notes, sketches, and what looked like some kind of map. But what caught her attention was the first entry. Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm so sorry I couldn't say goodbye in person, but I hope this letter finds you well. There's something I need to tell you, something I never got the chance to share while I was alive. It's about the cabin in the woods, the one I always talked about fixing up. There's a secret there, Eleanor, one that might change everything. Please go to the cabin. You'll find instructions in the old toolbox in the shed. I love you, always. Thomas. Eleanor stared at the wooden box, her heart racing. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, but the carvings on it were intricate, symbols and patterns she didn't recognize. She ran her fingers over the lid, hesitating. What could Thomas have meant by danger? And what kind of mystery had he been hiding all these years? She took a deep breath and slowly opened the box. Chapter 3. The Wooden Box. Inside the wooden box was something Eleanor never expected to see, a small, ornately designed compass. It was unlike any compass she had ever encountered. Its casing was made of polished silver, with intricate engravings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the cabin. The needle wasn't pointing north. Instead, it spun erratically, as if searching for something. Beneath the compass was another note, this one shorter than the others. Dear Eleanor, this compass is the key to the mystery. It's not an ordinary one. It will guide you to something that has been hidden for centuries. Follow where it leads, but be cautious. There are others who know of its existence, and they will stop at nothing to find it. Trust no one. Love, Thomas. Eleanor's mind raced. What could this compass be pointing to? And who were these others Thomas had mentioned? She turned the compass over in her hands, studying the engravings. They looked almost like runes, but she couldn't decipher their meaning. She sat back on the floor, her thoughts swirling. This was so unlike Thomas. He had always been practical, level-headed, not the kind of person to hide cryptic messages or mysterious artifacts. And yet here she was, holding proof that he had been keeping a secret from her. A sudden noise outside the cabin snapped her out of her thoughts. It sounded like footsteps, soft but deliberate. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was someone out there? She hesitated for a moment, then crept to the window, peering through the grimy glass. There was no one in sight, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She glanced back at the compass in her hand. The needle had stopped spinning and now pointed steadily toward the woods behind the cabin. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay here. Whoever had been outside, whether real or imagined, might return. She grabbed the journal, the compass, and the wooden box, stuffing them into a satchel she found in the closet. Then, with one last glance around the cabin, she stepped outside and headed toward the woods, following the compass's direction. The forest was dense, the trees towering overhead and blocking out much of the sunlight. The air was cool and damp, and the sound of rustling leaves and distant birds filled the silence. Eleanor walked cautiously, her eyes darting around as she tried to shake the feeling that she was being followed. After about 20 minutes of walking, she came to a small clearing. In the center of it stood an old, weathered stone structure, a well, partially covered by ivy and moss. The compass needle pointed directly at it. Eleanor approached the well cautiously, her heart pounding. She peered over the edge, but it was too dark to see anything. She grabbed a nearby stick and dropped it in, listening for the sound of it hitting the bottom. Instead of a splash, she heard a soft thud. It wasn't very deep. She hesitated for a moment, then made up her mind. She tied the satchel securely around her shoulders and began to climb down into the well. The stones were slippery, and her hands trembled as she gripped them, but she managed to lower herself safely to the bottom. There, in the dim light, she saw a narrow tunnel leading away from the well. The compass needle now pointed straight down the tunnel, as if urging her forward. Eleanor took a deep breath and began to walk. Chapter 4. The Hidden Tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and damp, the walls lined with rough-hewn stone that glistened with moisture. Eleanor's footsteps echoed softly as she moved forward, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick and musty, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. She had no idea how long she had been walking, minutes or hours, but the tunnel seemed endless. Her legs ached and her heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The compass in her hand still pointed firmly forward, and she clung to it like a lifeline. As she walked, she began to notice strange carvings on the walls, symbols similar to the ones on the wooden box. They seemed to tell a story, though she couldn't quite decipher it. Some depicted people holding the compass, others showed what looked like a map. She paused to study one of the carvings more closely, running her fingers over the cold stone. "What are you trying to tell me, Thomas?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound in the distance, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps. She froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Someone or something was in the tunnel with her. She turned off the flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The tapping grew louder, closer. She could hear the sound of heavy breathing now and the faint rustle of fabric. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. She stood there in the darkness, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. She waited for what felt like an eternity, but there was no further sound. Finally, she turned the flashlight back on, its beam sweeping the tunnel ahead. There was no one there. She let out a shaky breath and continued forward, more cautiously now. The air was growing colder, and the tunnel was beginning to slope downward. The walls became smoother, the carvings more intricate. And then, without warning, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber. Her flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but she could see that the chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow, and its walls lined with more of the strange carvings. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it rested an object that made her breath catch in her throat. It was another compass, Larger and more ornate than the one she held, its surface covered in the same intricate engravings. Surrounding the pedestal were 6 stone pillars, each marked with a symbol that matched one of the carvings on the walls. As she stepped closer, she noticed something else. The compass on the pedestal was missing its needle. Her mind raced. Was this the something Thomas had led her to? Was the needle in her compass the missing piece? She hesitated for only a moment before placing the smaller compass on the pedestal, aligning it with the larger one. As soon as she did, a soft click echoed through the chamber and the needle snapped into place. The engravings on the walls suddenly lit up, glowing with a soft golden light. The ground beneath her feet began to vibrate, and the air filled with a low, resonant hum. Eleanor stumbled back, her eyes wide open, with disbelief. The compass began to spin rapidly, its needle pointing in all directions, before finally settling on one, a wall on the far side of the chamber. As she watched in awe, the wall began to shift, the stones sliding apart to reveal a hidden passage. Beyond it, she could see a faint light. Chapter 5: The Final Revelation. Eleanor stepped through the hidden passage, her heart pounding in her chest. The air on the other side was warmer, carrying with it the scent of freshly turned earth. The passage led her into another chamber, but this one was different, filled with treasures that glinted in the light of her flashlight. Gold coins, ancient artifacts, and jeweled objects were scattered across the floor, piled high in corners as if they had been abandoned in a hurry. But it wasn't the treasure that caught her attention. It was the man standing in the center of the room. He was tall, with graying hair and a rugged face that seemed both familiar and strange. He turned to her as she entered, his eyes widening in shock. "Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. "Thomas?" She managed to choke out, her voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It's me," he said. Eleanor took a step forward, her legs unsteady. "But you're dead. I saw you die. I buried you." Thomas sighed, running his hair through his hair. "I know, and I'm sorry for everything you've been through, but I had to fake my death, Eleanor. There was no other way." Her mind was reeling. She wanted to run to him, to hold him, but the shock kept her rooted to the spot. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" He took a step closer, his voice soft but urgent. "Because of this," he said, gesturing to the treasures around them. "This is what I've been protecting. It's not just riches, it's a legacy, a secret that's been in my family for centuries. But there are people who would kill to get their hands on it. I couldn't risk putting you in danger." Eleanor shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You could have told me. We could have faced it together." "I wanted to," he said, his voice breaking. "But I didn't know who I could trust. Even now they're looking for this place. That's why I left you the compass so you could find me when the time was right." She took another step forward, her anger and confusion warring with her love for him. "And what now? What happens now?" Thomas reached out, gently taking her hand. "Now we finish what I started. Together. This treasure, it's not just for us, it's for the world. But we have to protect it until we can figure out how to reveal it safely." Eleanor looked around the room, her mind racing. She didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? Fear? But one thing was clear. She had a choice to make. She looked into Thomas's eyes, seeing the man she had loved for so many years, and slowly nodded. "All right," she said. "We'll do it together." A faint smile crossed his face, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of hope. But it was short-lived. From somewhere in the distance she heard voices, men shouting, their footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Thomas tensed, pulling away from her. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." She nodded, quickly grabbing the compass and the journal. Together they hurried through the chamber toward a narrow passage on the far side. Just before they stepped into the darkness, Eleanor glanced back at the treasures they were leaving behind. "Will it be safe?" she asked. Thomas squeezed her hand. "For now, but this isn't over." As they disappeared into the passage, the voices grew louder, and the golden glow of the chamber was swallowed by the darkness. The end.